How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is What If Deku Had King's Powers, the movie. Sit back, relax, and enjoy, and now, let's begin. It appears you're finally on your deathbed, King. A voice would rain down, echoing throughout the chamber that King and this mysterious figure were in. That may be so, but I won't let my legacy die. King would, as all of the sudden a portal would open up right beneath King, as he would throw his sacred treasure along with his son down through this portal. His son was newly born, just around a couple days old, and right after that, a massive attack had begun over the world King lived in. And because of this, Izuku wouldn't be able to grow up with his true father, King, and Diane. Izuku dropped into this portal with Chastaful. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, I am so bad with pronouncing things. So Izuku with Chastaful in its pillow form would be dropped down through this portal. Izuku would be dropped right in just this random off location, and there, walking right by, just so happened to be the number one hero, All Might. All Might would see this portal open up right in front of him, as well as seeing this child drop out with this pillow, and before it would even hit the ground, it would start hovering in the air. As All Might would walk over to it, hesitant to reach out, he would grab onto the pillow, bringing it closer to him, seeing the child on top of it. What the hell? What type of quirk is this? He would say, looking closely towards the kid and the pillow, seeing how it just floated in the air when he let go of it. As this would be happening, Izuku would be taken back towards All Might's house, as All Might would set himself across from the young child, who was basically just still sitting on the pillow. He would examine Izuku intently before just shrugging his shoulders. Well, I guess you're gonna have to stay here now, All Might would say, kind of scratching his head, kind of still a bit confused about where to go with this. So I guess I should probably get adoption papers set up. He would go to an adoption center, bringing Izuku with him, saying he found him on the side of the road and would like to adopt him. They would go through all the baby finding and missing persons report, just all this sort of things, and couldn't find anyone who was missing a baby. And so Izuku would be adopted by the number one hero. However, that wouldn't be said on his adoption papers. Rather, All Might wouldn't go in his super buff form, rather going in his he would be in his super buff form, or he would be just in his civilian clothes, I guess you could say. So with his Uku now the father of All Might, we cut forward 4 years to see an excited Izuku running around, just happy as can be, as he can't wait to see what his quirk is. His father would pat him on the head, telling him to calm down, as Izuku was a bit tiny compared to just All Might, as Izuku really just didn't take as much just genes from his mother and wasn't that tall, rather being more of a fairy than a giant. And so with Izuku having sort of a small stature, he would basically just completely take after his father while having little things like his mother. So with that, Izuku would be basically not even up to All Might's waistline, as All Might he's just massive, and Izuku's only 4 years old, so he is not that tall, only around 4 feet or so. So Izuku would end up being brought to the quirk doctor's office, where he would end up being examined to take some x-rays, this and that. However, because Izuku wasn't born in this sort of Cork timeline and Cork world, he's not going to have the same makeup that would show they have a cork. Say, for example, the extra bone fragment in someone's foot, which Izuku didn't have, and so the doctor would have to break the news. Look, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't appear you have a cork. Izuku would be kind of confused before asking if they did all the testing right. The cork doctor kind of a bit mad about this, as if Izuku was saying he could do the job better than him, like what does this 4-year-old child know? Yes, we must have done it right. Which Izuku would then promptly bring out the pillow that he had basically had since he was a baby, swiftly transforming Chastaful into just its normal Form 1 spear. As the doctor would look at, as Izuku would move it around with his finger with ease, so the doctor would end up thinking for a moment. Well, you must be quite the anomaly, I guess. Consider you weren't first generation to have a cork missing that bone fragment. Well, it appears I did make a mistake. I'm sorry about that. We'll write you down as Cork. Cork, you have a cork. And what would you like to call this cork, the doctor would say, with Izuku swiftly just shrugging his head. I don't know. Telekinesis? Izuku would shrug his shoulders, just thinking of a random cork, as the doctor would say, oh, telekinesis, alright. Okay. It would, as Izuku would end up, just as Izuku now having his cork chest, or telekinesis, which the government identifies it as we see Izuku grow up, going through just many different private schools, as Izuku actually would be called the son of the number one hero, as this is because Izuku was the son of All Might, and this was going to be quite hard, seeing as the public knows where All Might lives, and if a kid just starts walking out of his house every day, it's going to be quite hard to distract. So All Might would just say, it's not worth hiding it, and the public might as well know. So Izuku would end up basically becoming just a quite big celebrity in his country, as he was the son of the number one hero, All Might, who was basically just the pinnacle of fame at the top of the celebrity world. So Izuku, however, with his father, who was basically didn't have much of an ego, like, say, for example, Bakugo, would actually grow up to be quite humble, as many people would start to compare him to his father, which Izuku wouldn't like that comparison. Izuku could sure tell as he was adopted. He had no similarities with All Might whatsoever, and so he knew he was adopted, so comparing him to his father really just didn't make any sense. However, he didn't want to tell them that he was adopted, which could possibly stir up some controversy. So we see Izuku walking into school one day, as after going through a private elementary school, he would go to a public middle school, just deciding, I'll see what it's like. It's loving to try new things. Going there and meeting Bakugo, which would be a sort of person he didn't like at all. You have two exact opposites, someone who's humble and doesn't brag about their power, and then someone who's just complete up in your face, I'm better than you, my power is 1,000 times stronger than yours. So, it would make quite the interesting dynamic within the school. Izuku would walk in, resting his head on his arm, with the teacher walking in. Alright, class, it's now your final day, and it appears we have 2 students going to UA High School. I'm honestly quite shocked. This school really isn't known for anything. So, those 2 students are Bakugo Katsuki and Izuku. I would say as no one really knew what Izuku's last name was. It was just Izuku. So, because of that, they're kind of just nonchalant, as Bakugo would stare at him, kind of gritting his teeth. He was supposed to be the best and #1 person out of all of his schools, and now here comes this hotshot kid that's the son of the #1 hero, coming in and ruining all of that, coming in and basically just saying, well, look, I'm the son of the #1 hero, I'm better than you. Izuku would never say anything like that, but that's basically words Bakugo was putting into Izuku's mouth. So, one day, after this, Izuku would walk out of school after the bell would ring, as he would be walking alongside the road. As all of a sudden, he would end up seeing the green-haired, quirkless girl walking along the street as well, who was in his class. You see, for the sake of this video, there's going to be another Izuku, as Inko still exists in this universe, Hisashi still exists in this universe, and so there's no two Izukus. There's going to be a female, basically a female version of Izuku. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to do some crazy Izuku ship with Izuku. That's not going to happen. Hopefully. I'm kidding. It's not going to happen, as that's just quite weird. So, there's still going to be an Izuku of this universe, except they're a girl, just for the sake of plot. As really, I don't like making female Deku female, for there's really no reason for it, as it really doesn't change anything. However, for this, it sort of does change a big key point in, like, the story and plot. So, as Izuku would be walking down the side of the road, he would end up seeing this green-haired girl just walking under an overpass. All of the sudden, Izuku would get out Chastaful with its spear in hand. As Izuku would be floating it up, he could sense something bad was about to happen. Sure enough, as soon as he turned the corner, he would end up seeing the girl getting suffocated by a massive sludge villain. Izuku would walk when flicking his finger, as the spear would go right through the villain's eye, so he would instantly drop the girl version of Izuku, or I'll call her Izumi, dropping Izumi down to the ground as he would start screaming in pain. Izuku would rush in, punching him right in his other eye, grabbing it and yanking it out of the sludge. The sludge villain, now having basically no components to his body, would completely dissipate, as all of a sudden All Might, his father, would appear out of nowhere. As All Might would look down towards his son, Izuku, what happened here? Have you seen the sludge villain? Yeah, he's gone, Izuku would say, tossing up an eyeball towards his father. His father would catch it, looking down towards it. Izuku, how many times do I have to say this? You can't kill villains. Look, I was merely just protecting her, you would say, pointing backwards, as All Might would turn his attention, as the girl would instantly pick up all of her books that she had dropped, scrambling. Hello, All Might, she would say, kind of fangirling, seeing All Might. As would happen, Izuku would end up just walking away, as going towards him, just thanking him, which Izuku would put up a hand. No problem. He would say, walking away. Izumi would get an autograph, or she would end up grabbing hold of All Might, not getting enough of all of the questions. However, while she did this, the eyeball would end up dropping out of his grip, and it would end up resuming with the sludge. And the exact same thing happens in canon, just like normal My Hero Academia, except Izumi now instead of Izuku. Izuku is the son of King. So with Izuku walking down the side of the road, all of a sudden an explosion would end up happening, as he would end up turning towards it. As he would end up looking over the crowd, he would see Bakugo Katsuki struggling under the grip of a massive sludge villain. Izuku would see this, end up stepping forward about to do something, but that same green-haired girl that he had saved earlier would jump in, pushing him backwards, rushing in, peeling the sludge off of Bakugo. The Cyclops sludge villain would look towards the girl, smiling. "Oh, you come back? I can't believe you came back to me," he would with Izuku jumping in, his spear out, chastful ready, as he would end up going right towards stabbing right through the other villain's eye with such precision, as it would end up killing the sludge villain. As the entire crowd would look on, they would see Izuku falling to the ground as he would end up standing up, as Chastaful would come back, turning right back into a pillow. You know, that was really dangerous, Izuku would say towards the girl, which she would look up towards him. Yeah, I know, she would say, stuttering her words, really not sure what to say. Well, maybe think about it next time. You know you are quirkless, but you did buy enough time for me. Thank you. Izuku said towards her before walking away. All of the people would end up moving around, making room for Izuku as he would walk out, as they would all just be in awe of seeing All Might's son in person. He indeed was so strong, just like all those news articles they had read about him said. We end up cutting forward to see All Might end up catching up with the young green-haired girl, saying how she has the heart of a true hero and that he would like to give her his quirk. With All Might would end up just receiving a question from the young girl. But what about your son? He's so much stronger than me. You saw him. He saved me twice. Yeah, but I tried to give him my quirk. He is quite the hero. He says there's always someone better. Plus, he already has quite the power. Could go to someone who really needs it. Which is quite admiring, but yeah, that's where we are now, All Might would say. And basically, the same stuff happens like in the normal story, except with the Izumi now having one for all. If you guys can come up with any better names for this girl version of Izuku, please tell me down in the comment section below, as Izuku and Izumi might get confusing, but if not, tell me that as well. So as we end up seeing Izuku walk in to the UA campus, he could have taken the basically selection exams. I can't remember the name. It's like a special exams where Todoroki, Momo, and a bunch of other kids were in, which Izuku could have taken those, but he decided not to. Rather, he would get in fair and square like all the other kids. So Izuku would walk in, take the written exam, and would end up going to the hero exam as well. As Izuku would be stretching, all of the kids would kind of be looking at him, sizing him up, as if they were about to fight him. They would all be looking at the skinny-looking Izuku, and would once again compare him to his father. Isn't that the son of All Might? Yeah, it is. Why is he so small? Don't you think he'd be a lot more buff than that, like his father? Izuku would end up just looking at all of them, kind of glaring at them for comparing him to his father, which all his own stare would sort of back them off. As Izuku would end up seeing the doors open, would instantly grab hold of his spear as he would launch off into the distance. As Izuku would end up dropping off his spear, controlling it with his finger, flicking it around the entirety of just this road he was in, as he would completely shred through mountains upon mountains of robots. As Izuku would continue just completely going through all of them. As all of the students back behind Izuku would stare on just in complete awe. Moments ago, they had just been sort of saying Izuku wasn't all that he was basically supposed to be. He wasn't looking strong, he wasn't just crazy strong or athletic looking. He looked skinny and weak, but here he was completely destroying the robots, racking up points, while they were sitting there just watching him. As Izuku would look back towards them, smiling now. Oh, what's come on? Y'all get cold after we destroy all these robots? You really shouldn't judge a book by its cover, Izuku would say, pointing towards all of them, before grabbing hold of Chastaful and basically flying away with it. As Izuku would end up jumping down into the next horde of robots and would completely destroy them with ease, not having to use any other forms besides form one of his spear. However, all of a sudden, a massive zero-pointer would appear out of nowhere, as Izuku would end up hearing a girl yell for help. As this kept happening, Izuku would turn towards it, as he would see a brunette-haired girl just struggling to lift up any rocks off of her crushed leg. Izuku would take a step before running off in a sprint, rushing towards the robot with his spears following close behind him. Right as Izuku was about to jump up and do something, right as he jumped up into the air, he would catch a hold of his spear, holding it into the air, stopping in midair. As right there, the same green-haired girl, Izumi, would jump into the air, her fist clenched up into a ball, punching the zero-pointer with such power, sending it flying backwards. As Izuku, seeing that happen, would end up getting behind the zero-pointer, catching it, stopping it from hitting any of just the other examinees that were behind it. As Izumi would fall down to the ground, being slapped by Uraraka, saving her from falling down and hitting her head on just the road below. As Izuku would end up getting up from the robot, pushing it off of himself, he would end up asking if everyone behind him was okay. He would look towards the girl before muttering under his breath how reckless she was, but she did end up saving one life, and if he wasn't there, probably would have cost her about 5. As over the intercom, Izuku would hear that the testing was over, he would end up walking out of basically the entire city-looking thing. Walking out, as he would end up stretching, going back to his father's house. "How'd you do?" his father would ask him. Izuku would shrug his shoulders. I did alright. But I talked to your little, I don't know what you call it, your successor about being reckless. She almost killed 5 people. She what? I'll let her explain it to you. I don't really feel like telling a story right now. Izuku walking back with All Might just shaking his head. I do think I did quite well, though, Izuku would say, sort of smiling, with his back turned towards his father, as his father would smirk. That's great to hear. So that's the number 1 hero's son, whispers would say, erupting around Class 1A, as they would all be staring on towards Izuku, who was merely just staring out of a window, minding his own business. They would all be talking about how he looked so thin, just like in all the pictures. He looked nothing like his father, All Might. He basically looked like the complete opposite. All Might had yellow hair, while Izuku had more dark brownish hair. And All Might was insanely muscular, and then you have Izuku, who looks like he's insanely skinny and just all bones. So as Izuku sitting there, Aizawa would walk into the room, telling the class to quiet down. "Alright, class, today we're going to be doing a test to see if all of you have the potential to even be in this class," he would say towards them, looking and basically just giving them a look that said, "You better not screw this up." All of them would go put their PE uniforms on, as they would then meet Aizawa out just in the courtyard, where they would end up just seeing a numerous amount of tests set up for all of them. Izuku would be given a ball, saying that he scored the highest number of points out of everyone on the hero exam, and that he needs to throw it. Izuku would grab the ball before chucking it in the air, as his pillow that was tucked nicely under his arm would then turn into chestful, as it would then go right towards the ball, basically stabbing it right through itself. As it would stab itself right through, the ball would continue going just hundreds of yards away before Izuku would take Chastaful out, as the ball would continue its momentum, landing a mere 300 yards away. Aizawa would look down shocked at just the tracker before laughing. "I expected nothing less from you, Izuku." Next up, Bakugo Katsuki. Bakugo would step up, grabbing the ball out of I saw his hand. I saw look at Bakugo. Bakugo would wind back his hand, launching the ball up into the air. As this ball would end up launching its way through, it would end up only going around 1,000 meters or so. As Bakugo would end up stomping on the ground, just wondering how the hell did Izuku throw it so damn far, and yet he didn't throw it nearly as much, only around 1/3 of Izuku. He's stronger than him, surely. These tests would continue with Izuku continuing to completely just outright destroy Bakugo on all of them, easily passing through it. As we now cutting forward a couple days, Izuku basically being solidified as the strongest kid in the class, even though he looks nothing like it. If you were to look in a random person, they would think it would probably be one of the stronger looking kids, or someone like Bakugo. Nothing like Izuku, they probably would choose him as one of the weakest. So with that, we end up seeing Izuku basically just walking into class, stretching out one day as he heard from his father that he was going to be their new hero teacher. As Izuku sat there in his seat, he would basically just be staring towards the door before he would end up hearing loud stomping from down the halls. He would smirk to himself before just shaking his head. "You never really knew how to make a silent entrance, did you, Dad?" Izuku would say, opening back his eyes and staring towards the door, as he would then bust open with All Might standing there in the doorway, shining with all his glory and might. All of the students would stare on towards All Might, all of them jumping out of their seats, smiling. "Whoa, is that All Might?" many of them would say, kind of just shocked seeing the number one hero standing there in their presence. As all of them would standing there, Zuko would end up just being told that they all now had hero costumes, and they were going to put them on. Izuku would basically, just for simplicity, would have a hero costume similar to that of what King would wear in Seven Deadly Sins. So that's just basically, for simplicity, that's basically just going to be his hero costume, just as a huge coincidence. So with that, we end up seeing Izuku and all of his classmates walk down to the locker rooms, putting their hero costumes on, and then walking out to where they were going to be doing the Heroes vs. Villains test. As all of them would walk out, they would all basically be staring at each other, just looking at all of their hero costumes, as we end up seeing All Might walking once again, explaining the Heroes vs. Villains before creating the teams. Alright, the first team's going to be Izumi and Izuku. The second team is going to be Bakugo and Uraraka. He would say loudly with his voice, as all of nod their heads, with Izuku's team being the heroes, just like in canon, while Bakugo would be the villains. As Bakugo would have his two most hated people from his middle school on the other team, he would be ready to smash someone's face into the ground. Cracking his knuckles, he would glare on towards both Izuku and Izumi before walking into the building to hide the device. As he would end up being hidden, the 5-minute counter would be over, as Izuku and Izumi would head right into the building. Once they were inside, they would all look around, basically just wondering where Bakugo and Uraraka happened to be. Bakugo, being Bakugo, would yell for Floaty, or whatever his nickname for Uraraka to be, to stay behind and protect the device, while he went out and would destroy both Izuku and Izumi. Uraraka would say, "Are you sure? I've seen both of their quirks, and they're both extremely strong. Not to mention you'd be facing off against All Might's son." "Shut up about that," Bakugo would quickly fire back, having enough of hearing about All Might's son this and All Might's son that. It was like he was in the shadow of another person, and he didn't like that at all. While Izuku was in the shadow of All Might, Bakugo was in the shadow of Izuku constantly. As this would be happening, Bakugo would continue to turn corners with his arm flailed out, ready to throw an explosion. As this would be happening, all of the sudden Izuku, sensing Bakugo, would immediately pull back his Umi by the hood on her hero costume. "Stop. What do you mean?" she would stutter out, saying, kind of confused what Izuku was doing. Behind that corner, Bakugo's around 5 steps away. Izumi would look towards Izuku, kind of confused, before all of the sudden Bakugo would come out of nowhere, his arm flailing, about to throw a massive explosion. That's right when Chastaful would turn into just a massive guardian, this sort of greenish-looking teddy bear thing, blocking right in front of Bakugo. So Bakugo would towards it, throwing explosion after explosion, but nothing would happen, as the air was completely almost resistant to any fire, as it had so much water in it that fire really didn't do anything to it. And so, as he was doing this over and over again, the bear with its 4 arms would grab onto all of Bakugo's limbs, subduing Bakugo, not allowing him to even move. As Bakugo would continue to struggle, Izuku would walk up straight in front of him. "Well, Bakugo, it appears your fieriness has gotten you caught once again," would say, pointing out his fingers right towards Bakugo, pointing right into his eyes, pushing down into it, causing Bakugo to start flailing even more in pain, when all of a sudden Izuku would end up punching him across the face, knocking him out. I can't believe someone like that, with that type of attitude, managed to get into such a prestigious school like this. It's quite shocking, don't you think, Izumi? Izuku would look towards her with a questioning gaze, which she would quickly nod. With the power of both Izumi and Izuku, they would both rush in, easily capturing the device, as Uraraka was no match for the two. However, Izumi would end up breaking her arm in the process, still not able to fully control One for All. With Izumi going off to recover girl, Izuku would watch intently on towards just the rest of the matches, looking on towards Todoroki, as Izuku saw Todoroki as the person that was closest to him, the person that was the closest to being just tied with him in power, and he wasn't about to have something like that happen. So Izuku would watch him looking for any weaknesses within his form, which Izuku would notice right away. Todoroki, although strong, would only use his ice quirk, never using his fire, which Izuku would sort of laugh to himself, as he was basically immune to his fire, but wasn't quite sure about the ice thing. He had never basically trained with anyone with an ice quirk, as they are extremely rare. As all of the fighting would end, Izuku would walk to Recovery Girl's office, checking in up on his teammate Izumi before leaving back to his house. Once Izuku would make it back, All Might would end up making it back there just a couple hours after Izuku. Izuku would be sitting there, basically just eating some dinner that he had cooked up, as All Might would end up walking up to him. "So, how was my teaching?" he would say, rubbing the back of his head, kind of just wondering. It was alright. Definitely couldn't need some improvements. You're still a rookie at it," Izuku would say, pointing his fork right towards All Might. So All Might would sort of awkwardly laugh, before Izuku would go right back to eating. As the next day would end up coming, as just basically being a hero school, they would instantly have another hero, just a training exercise. And this would be the USJ, on the 3rd day of school. As all of them would put their hero costumes on, and would get onto a bus, they would all head off towards this massive circular dome-shaped building. Once they would arrive, they would all just marvel at its beauty and how massive it was. Right? So they would all enter. Izuku would look around, basically just staring at all of the different zones that were there, basically just wondering if anything bad were to happen. As all of a sudden, Izuku's instincts were right. A purplish portal would accumulate right in the middle of the building, right in front of the fountain. Right as it accumulates, Izuku would stare on towards it, Before grabbing on to Chastaful, as it would turn into a pillow, Zuko would float right up towards the ceiling, getting an aerial view. He would stare on towards all of them as if the students would look on towards just all of the villains, many of them wondering if they were fake or real, as they were all just so kind of confused, kind of caught off guard by something like this and of this nature. As all of them would stare on, Zuko would see a portal open up right underneath all of his classmates. Zuko would reach on towards them, however, it would be too late. All of them would basically be sucked up into this portal and would be scattered throughout the USJ, all except a select few that had the intuition to jump out of the way, which would be basically just Ida and a few others. As Zuko would end up going down to Ida, Zuko would go to the door, about to reach it, as Kurogiri would stop right in his tracks. I'm not having you escape now. My master can't have that happen, you see. Zuko would stare towards Kurogiri, who was blocking the exit, immediately looking for any weaknesses. His eyes would catch right on towards the metal, Chastaful turning back into its first form before burrowing into the metal, creating a massive gaping hole. Kurogiri would instantly reduce in size, yelling out in pain. Zuko would end up slamming a door open and push Ida out of it. Ida, go to the UA building and tell Nezu about this. You're easily the fastest one here. Got it, Ida would barely manage to say out before rushing off, using his engines to run on towards the USJ. A run towards the UA building. As this happened, when all of this sudden to be punched by a massive purple bird monster, causing him to be sent flying down, slamming into the fountain. I can't believe people like you somehow managed to screw up all of my plans, a bluish-haired person would say, standing over Izuku, his hand reaching down towards him. However, all of the sudden, Izuku ended up jumping up, Chastaful now in his hand. So he would end up throwing it towards them, using his finger, guiding it along, piercing the hand right through the blue-haired boy's hand. He would yell out in pain, holding his hand that now had a massive hole in it. Holding it, he would yell, looking towards Izuku in anger, yelling, what the hell did he do to him? As Izuku would only just laugh. Oh, it's nothing. Just immobilize one of your hands, he would say before flicking his fingers once again, as his Chastaful would then go right through Shigaraki's second hand, as his other hand would fall right down to the ground, as his arms would go numb. What the hell? He would yell out towards Izuku, who would only smile on towards him. Can't believe people like you still exist in this world. So weak and blind to the real thing. Things aren't gonna always go your way, Zuko would say towards the blue-haired boy as he would rush towards him, just slapping his hands, flailing around aimlessly. However, they would do nothing, so Zuko would continue to dodge Shigaraki's attacks with ease. As Shigaraki would end up jumping back, yelling for the Nomu to do something. However, before the Nomu could even do anything, it would end up being blocked by Aizawa, elbowing it right in his head. As Aizawa would look towards Izuku, yelling, "Alright, Izuku, I got this from here. Go save some of your classmates." He would yell as Izuku would nod his head. Alright. Rushing out, he would end up going towards the flood zone first, as that was the first zone and the closest zone to him. Right as Izuku managed to get there, though, all of the sudden he would end up hearing an explosion as water would slam and fly down, raining down. Izuku would shield his eyes. What is that? He would mutter to himself. He would look up, so he would end up seeing Zuko carrying Tsuyuasui under her arms, Izumi carrying Tsuyuasui under her arms, as Mineta wouldn't be here, as Izuku would take his place. As this would happen, Izuku would end up seeing all of them fly down, as he would end up catching the two of them, putting them down, saving them from a rough landing. So the two would, behind a rock, Izuku would, on seeing that Aizawa's fight with the Nomu wasn't getting any better for Aizawa. In fact, it was getting a hell of a lot worse. Aizawa was continuing to get beat down continuously by the Nomu, as Izuku would end up jumping in, going right behind the Nomu, as he would end up behind him. Chastaful would end up using fossilization, piercing right through the heart of the Nomu, as the Nomu would slowly end up turning into a rock, fossilizing basically. As the Nomu completely immobilized, all of the sudden the doors would break down, as All Might would be standing there, instantly jumping in, punching the now fossilized Nomu, completely shattering it to oblivion. As all of the rocks would fall down, All Might would reach towards Shigaraki and would end up grabbing him, as Kurogiri, still being weakened by Izuku's hole in his shell, would allow for Shigaraki to be captured and Kurogiri to as well be captured too. With both of them captured, Izuku would end up going around along with All Might to go save the rest of his classmates, basically going as a father-son duo, while the rest of the UA staff would be taking care of just dealing with the Shigaraki and Kurogiri situation, as it was quite hard to subdue both of them, both being quite strong villains. In fact, they weren't just your everyday thugs. As they would be dealing with this, all of the students would end up being saved, as Izuku would end up just being thanked by Izumi along with Aizawa, as if it wasn't for Izuku, Izumi probably would have broken her ankle or leg the fall they were going on, and Aizawa possibly could have died from the Nomu. However, right before any of this could happen, a gooish portal would open up, stopping Kurogiri and Shigaraki from getting into the back of an armored police van. How can we just let two of these highly valued criminals just escape from our hands right when we had them right in our grasp? Look, All Might, sometimes things like this can happen. We're not immune to other people's quirks, especially if they're outside the premises. All Might would slam his hands down onto the table in frustration. Now these students have 1 month off, and these villains are still out there lurking around in the real world. Who knows what could happen to the students if they're out there? Maybe the villains might coordinate an attack on each one of them individually while they're outside of our protection. You know, that does actually bring up quite a good point, All Might, Nezu would say towards the shiny yellow figure. Perhaps we should have more security systems. Yes, especially after this attack on campus. And in addition to that, we can add dorm rooms, just as another added level of security for the students. As if one were to die, that would be horrible for us along with the family, while also for our just reputation indeed. Nezu would all be saying this, sort of mumbling to himself, as All Might would just get up and leave, just leaving Nezu to basically just talk to himself for another hour over what security measures need to be added to the campus. As Izuku would be sitting in his room, he would end up be thinking what would end up happening in a month when he gets back from UA. As he knew in around 5 months or so he had the sports festival. However, interrupting his train of thought, his father would end up walking in, yelling at him that he needs to go train, as the UA Sports Festival had been jumped forward to be the day right when all of the UA students come back from their break, giving all of them a month to train their absolute hardest. So with that, Izuku and all of them would end up basically train for this month, having been told through email and all these other things that the sports festival was happening. We fast forward that month as we now end up seeing Izuku and all of his class walking into the UA Sports Festival Coliseum. All of them would stare up at the blinding lights blaring down at them before looking up towards the stands that were completely packed, as the stadium had completely sold out within minutes of offering tickets. All of them would look up, marveling at how many people before Izuku would be called to the stand, being the first-year representative, as well as also being All Might's son. As Izuku would walk up there, he would wish everybody luck, causing the crowd to cheer, which would signify the start of the games. So the first event would be a race, which Izuku, like this, would end up walking up to the starting line, stretching out for a moment before he would end up hearing the just sound of go being yelled over just a massive speaker. Izuku, hearing this, would instantly rush off, but would know that this race would most likely just be sort of a placement thing. There's going to be a certain number of people that are allowed to continue on, and seeing that there's around 200 first years competing, there's likely only going to be around 1/4 of that, so around 50 people are going to make it. So all he has to do is make it in the top 50, preferably top 15, just in case there's any added things to placement. So Izuku, knowing first place, if there was anything added, would give him a strategic disadvantage. He would end up going into this race and would end up making it to the finish line, waiting for a few people to pass him. These being having like Momo and Ida end up passing him, which Izuku would walk into the finish line getting 5th place. Just getting 5th place, when in reality he could have gotten anywhere from 1st to 3rd. So with Izuku passed, we now end up going to the cavalry battle, where Izuku ends up learning that they do have a point system, and in fact, since he didn't go for 1st place, he now had the luck of not being stuck with a 10 million point headband. So with Izuku now not having that fabled 10 million point headband, he would end up being able to just gather a team so much quicker. So Izuku would end up going around gathering up his team, where he would just asking them all, hey, do you want to be on my team? He would go to Uraraka, Izumi, and Izumi, and Ida, all of them joining him, as Izumi, who had gotten around 7th, as the strategy Izuku had used in canon didn't work this time due to Izuku being there, blocking out the path she used. So because of this, she would only get around 7th, not having the 10 million point headband that Bakugo now has. So with the start of the cavalry battle, Izuku end up cracking his fingers before looking around, knowing he has to get at least 300 point headbands or so. However, with the combined total of his team, all of them who had placed the top 20, 3 of them in fact getting top 10, they were pretty well set off, but a couple more headbands wouldn't hurt their goal of making it to the 3rd and final round. So Izuku would end up looking around, yelling for Ida to rush in a straight line, where they would doing so as Chastful would end up flying around, snagging ribbons off of people's heads, bringing them right back to Izuku, and snatching them and putting them onto his head. Right as this would happen, Bakugo would come flying out of nowhere with a glare on his face, with an evil, devilish smile looking down onto Izuku and his ribbons. Reaching forward, he would grab a couple of them, tugging on them, for Chastful would come out of nowhere, slamming its sharp point right into Bakugo's cheek, piercing right through it, sending him flying into one of the end walls, where another team would come in, snagging the 10 million point headband right off of Bakugo's head. This battle for the 10 million point headband would continue further, as Izuku's team would get around 3rd place in the cavalry battle, securing their spot in the 3rd and final event, while Bakugo would have to be carted off towards Recovery Girl's office before he could take part in the 3rd event, as his team had managed to recover the 10 million point headband, as he still had that gaping hole right in his cheek, revealing all of his teeth in his mouth. So as Bakugo would get patched up, the first match would end up being announced, Izumi and Izuku. This match would go basically just like normal, as Izumi would end up getting brainwashed but would end up coming out on top of the victory. However, Todoroki in fact would be in the other opposite bracket from Izumi, rather being in Bakugo's bracket instead of hers, meaning Suro would get past the first round and would end up facing off against Izumi, where Izumi would quickly take care of Suro, and with one flick, Suro would be out of the arena, giving Izumi just a path to the semi-finals, where she would end up meeting Izuku, who would end up easily taking care of his first 2 opponents, being Ida and Mei Hatsume, as his fight against Ida would go short and quick, as Ida would end up rushing towards Izuku. Chastaful would turn into a massive guardian, blocking all of Ida's attacks, before with its 4 limbs grabbing on to Ida's legs, grabbing on, allowing for Ida to not move a single muscle, basically completely subduing him before Izuku would walk up, knocking him out. And because Mei Hatsume really had no intentions of making it to the finals, she would only just show off her gadgets, which Izuku would allow her to do, being just such a kind heart that he was. So with Izuku now having a clear path to the semi-finals, he would be facing off against his father's successor, Izumi Midoriya. As Izuku would stare off right towards her, the match would begin, as she would end up using her legs, propelling herself forward towards him, flicking her fingers towards Izuku, with her guardian would end up blocking a massive amount of wind flying on towards him. As Izuku would peer around the corner, he would stare to Izumi before telling her she's going to need a lot more firepower than that to blow him out of this arena. Knowing this, she would rush up closer, flicking Izuku, or at least trying to, as the Guardian would be right there blocking her attack once again. Right as this would happen, Izuku would up to Chastaful, standing on it, sort of like some sort of broom thing. As Izuku would be standing there, he would stare on towards Izumi, would use her legs, jumping up towards him, going for a punch. However, Izuku would dodge this. As he would end up falling back down, Izumi would continue her just barrage of punches, all of which would be quickly dodged by Izuku, who's quickly and easily maneuvering around the rapid punches of Izumi, tiring her out quite quickly. As all of these punches would be quickly just decreasing in momentum and power, Izuku would sense that Izumi was losing most of her stamina, and that this fight was coming to an end. As Izuku would end up seeing this, would end up jumping back, using Chastaful, guiding it around, slashing right across Izumi's cheek. Before, a power he had inherited from his father, King Disaster, would allow for this cut to quickly open up right into a massive gash, spewing blood out of it. As this knew that if she didn't forfeit the match within 5 minutes, she would likely bleed out, as this massive wound was huge, bigger than even Bakugo's one that he had suffered in the cavalry battle. As Midnight would look over towards the cement hero right across from her, basically with a questioning look as if they should cancel the fight or end it, he would give her a just shake of the head, signifying that Izumi wasn't done. She still had a fire in her eyes that said she wasn't going to give up just quite yet. Sensing this, Izuku, knowing she wasn't giving up, he would up jumping backwards, laughing. I'm surprised you haven't given up already, would say, cracking his knuckles before jumping up as Chastaful would go into its fifth form, increase as a massive just army of these small spears of basically smaller versions of Chastaful would end up raining down over Izumi, and with the flick of Izuku's fingers, all of them would fall down right on top of her. As when the dust would settle, Izumi would be revealed to be standing there with her just arm completely broken, wobbling on both of her legs, barely managing to destroy all of them, or at least flick them away, if not destroy them. Chastaful would go back into its first form as Izuku would look towards her. Quite impressive. You managed to eat my fifth form of Chastaful. That's quite more impressive than I thought you'd be able to do. But it's a shame. Your body's already given up on you, Izuku would say, looking towards her as she would fall back, falling onto her back as she would go unconscious, as Izuku would be awarded the victor, going on to the final round, where we end up cutting to the second semi-finals, being Bakugo versus Todoroki, and this fight would go exactly like canon My Hero Academia, except instead of the finals, it would be the semi-finals, where Bakugo would be angered by Todoroki not using his fire, and would end up just completely destroying him, as Todoroki basically stood little chance if he wouldn't use his fire against Bakugo, as his ice would just completely be destroyed and massacred. So now we end up standing across from Izuku and Bakugo. Bakugo would glare daggers into Izuku. Izuku would only give a blank look right back. As the match would begin, Bakugo and Izuku would both stare at each other for what seemed like hours before finally one of them would move. Chastaful would fly on towards Bakugo, as Bakugo would continue to evade all of Chastaful's quick swipes and attacks. However, Izuku was only moving his fingers, guiding Chastaful around the arena, so he'd continually go in for an attack after an attack, seemingly stopping out of nowhere and quickly changing directions. This would keep Bakugo on his toes, as Bakugo would end up having to increasingly dodge this before jumping right at Izuku, going in for an explosion, before Chastaful would end up blocking this explosion right with second form, Guardian. It's a shame, Bakugo, Izuku would start off. Your explosions have little chance of affecting me, as long as this guy right here, Izuku would say, patting the Guardian's shoulder, is standing in front of me. There's absolutely no chance you can beat me, Izuku would say with an overconfident grin written all over his face. Bakugo would clench his hands in anger, looking on towards Izuku, before shaking off this anger. As if! I know you have a weakness, Izuku. Everyone does. Yeah, well, if everyone has a weakness, Bakugo, then your weakness is me, he would say, pointing towards his chest before going right towards Bakugo from nowhere and punching him right across the face, sort of an act that was unusual for Izuku. As Bakugo would end up stumbling backwards, holding his cheek, kind of caught off guard from the punch, would end up jumping towards Izuku before his wrist would be grabbed by the Guardian, as the explosion would be taken right into the chest of it. As the Guardian would stare on towards Bakugo, it would glare towards him before throwing him back, as Izuku end up staring at him, as he would end up turning Chastaful into his massive sunflower, so he would end up blooming, creating a mass of just aura of destruction raining down right onto Bakugo. So Bakugo would stare up towards it in shock, completely just being consumed by it, as the crowd would end up cheering in excitement, just so in shock at the level of powers Uku had shown, and many of them would just chalk it up to being, yup, he's the son of All Might's, or he's All Might's son after all. There's no doubt about it. Both of them are so powerful, many of them would say to themselves. As Izuku would end up seeing the dust settle with Bakugo's unconscious body standing there, or rather sitting there completely unconscious, his UA uniform basically completely shredded by the sunflower, Shastafel would end up turning right back into a pillow, with Izuku grabbing it. We cut to see just the medal ceremony, with Bakugo having to be tied up. He wanted the fight to continue. He felt like he hadn't given his all yet, and that he still had some more left in him. However, the UA teachers and organizers knew that wasn't the case. He was done. There was no chance he was recovering from such a heavy loss like that. Plus, he was already injured from the cavalry battle, and just injuring him even more wasn't going to be good for his health. So Izuku would stand on top with a gold medal around his neck, as Bakugo would be in second, and Izumi, who would end up convincing Todoroki to use his fire, wouldn't even be on the podium at all, rather getting fourth and Todoroki in third. As Todoroki would be third, Bakugo in second, and Izuku in first. Izuku, the rest of his class would be dismissed, where all of them would be congratulating the three of them for all placing on the podium, all of them being members of Class 1A, just showing how much more powerful Class 1A was than Class 1B. As we end up cutting and seeing Izuku walking back towards his house, where he would end up sitting down with his gold medal on a coffee table in front of him. His father would walk in just laughing. What a ray of power you showed out there. I'm quite impressed. Usually you take the easy way out and just use your most powerful attack right from the gate. I see you decided that strategy wasn't good enough for you now. You still haven't seen a fraction of my power, Dad. Izuku would say to his father, as his father would only laugh. We'll see about that during the final exams for your first year. Izuku walks into school, where he would end up seeing a massive stack of papers lying on his desk. As he would get closer, he would start reading out the names of a bunch of different heroes and their hero agencies. As he would be reading, Aizawa would end up walking up to the podium at the front of the classroom. Class, these are your, what do they call it? Volunteer things. I don't really care. You're just gonna be volunteering at these, hero agencies. I'm so tired. Aizawa would say before slumping back down into his sleeping bag and falling asleep, telling everyone that once they're done, just put them on his desk, and he'll submit them to Nezu at the end of the day. And after that, they basically just had an entire free day to do whatever they wanted. So by that, Izuku would look through all of them and would end up finding his father's name fairly quickly, as it was All Might after all, starting with a capital A. So finding it easily, he would choose that, would then put his selection paper up at the front desk before going back to his own desk. Now, from here, the internships basically play out like normal, except Izuku's just getting trained by All Might, and Izumi's getting trained by Gran Torino. The same Nomu Stain fight happens. Todoroki, Izumi, and Ida all fight the Nomu. Not the Nomu, Stain. All fight Stain. Stain gets taken care of. It's Ida gets in the hospital. I think Izumi goes to the hospital as well, all while Izuku is training off in the woods with All Might for the final exam, where All Might would end up spilling out that Izuku's going to be facing off against him in the finals, as what's not to like about the strongest student in all of UA, or in the first years at least, going up against the strongest teacher there as well. So with that, we end up cutting forward a couple weeks as we end up seeing all of the students walk into the classroom. Alright class, today we are going to be doing the final exams. This is going to decide what you're going to be doing for summer training, whether you're going to and the next 2 weeks outside training and having fun, or the next 2 weeks inside of a classroom catching up with the rest of your classmates. All of the students would kind of just look on, kind of in just complete shock, not wanting to have to go outside or not wanting to be stuck in a classroom for so long. They just did not want that to happen at all. So with that, we end up seeing all of the students go put their hero costumes on as we see Izuku crack his knuckles before cracking his neck. As this would happen, Izuku would be told he was going up for the last match with Bakugo up against his father, All Might. Izuku would basically just sigh, hoping he would have had a better teammate than Bakugo, as Bakugo clearly wasn't going to be much help to him at all. Bakugo wasn't going to be much of a team, as Izuku could basically predict this. Bakugo was, how do I say this, just going to be selfish and try to beat All Might all on his own, try to prove to the world he is something to be reckoned with, when in reality he should just try to work with Izuku to take down Bakugo. So as Izuku would be standing there, as all of the matches would go on, we now see Izuku's match up against his father. Both of them would walk into the city as Izuku would stare down the exit, before he would end up laughing to himself. I'd be a fool to try to go to the exit. As well as Bakugo there would also end up being Izumi, as Mineta not being in this class. However, a new student would have jumped up, this being Shinso, due to showing his brainwashing ability and being taken under the wing by Isawa just a bit sooner. He would end up being thrown into this final exam just to see where his skills are at, taking the place of where Mineta was. So with Izumi, Izuku, and Bakugo all there, Izuku would know this was probably going to be quite the easy fight. So you would end up jumping up onto the top of a roof, looking for wherever just All Might was. As Izuku would start scanning around, he would end up spotting his father rushing throughout the city, running towards Bakugo, who'd propel himself forward, reaching out his hand with an explosion, about to slam it into All Might's face. However, All Might would end up twisting his fist around, punching All Might full force right across the cheek, as one of Bakugo's teeth would end up chipping out, flying across the city. So All Might would end up laughing towards Bakugo. Bakugo, aren't you a fool? You know better than to attack the number one hero all by yourself. All Might would say in a taunting manner, as Bakugo only shrugged this off, yelling that he was going to beat All Might. As All Might would only just laugh at him. Oh, sure you're gonna beat me. He would end up yelling out, basically turning into some sort of villain, getting into this whole persona. As this was happening, Izuku watched both Bakugo and Izumi struggle to even land a finger on his father. While this was happening, Izuku would end up jumping up, cracking his fingers before stretching out even further. He would yawn to himself. I guess it's finally time to join. He would end up jumping down, catching himself on Chastafel, riding it along before jumping off, using his fingers, guiding it across before it would end up stabbing right through All Might's hand, which had become basically one of Izuku's favorite moves. Right as it would stab through All Might's hand, Izuku would jump in, grabbing Chastafel, spinning it around his hands, stabbing it right through All Might's chest. Izuku would pull the spear out. He would end up jumping backwards, looking towards his father. You're far weaker than I thought, Dad, Izuku would say, jumping backwards as All Might would go for a punch towards him, only merely missing Izuku by a couple of inches. As both Bakugo and Izumi would take this opportunity, Izumi using One for All in her hands, using full punching All Might across the face, as Bakugo would counter this with an explosion on the other side. As All Might would be feeling of this pain, would end up dropping to his legs, about to take off his weights before realizing he wasn't even wearing any weights to begin with. He would end up smiling to himself before shaking his head. You two are lucky Izuku was here. And I'm saying before disappearing, all of them would end up looking around, wondering where All Might had gone, before he would end up appearing right behind Izuku, going to take him down, right about to wrap his hands around Izuku's stomach. Izuku would end up turning around, elbowing All Might right in the stomach, before Jasper would end up slashing right across All Might's shoulder, before Izuku would end up splitting it into a massive gaping wound, because of his just ability he had gotten from his true father, King. This being Disaster, as this cut would end up exploding into a massive gash with blood pouring out of it. All Might would put his hand over to his shoulder, holding it, wincing in pain. You truly are something, kid. All Might would raise his hand slowly before saying he forfeits, as Izumi, Izuku, and Bakugo would all get the victory. So we now end up cutting forward to see all of the students riding a bus to just the main mountain area where they were going to be doing their summer training camp, where all of the training would go on like normal, just like canon, up until we end up seeing basically the villain attack. This time both Izuku and Izumi go out looking for Kota, and because of this, they would both end up fighting Muscular, where because Izumi and Izuku are both there, two of the stronger students on Class 1A, or in Class 1A, they would easily take care of Muscular, especially because of the help of Izuku, as Muscular would grow more and more muscle, all it would take was one slash of Izuku, and this muscle fiber would end up just deteriorating, because it would be completely destroyed by Disaster. As this would be happening, Izuku would end up walking up to Muscular, knocking him out before he would end up being thrown off the cliff, as he was getting pushed further and further back. With Muscular knocked out, Izuku would place some handcuffs he had around Muscular's arms before going into consoling Kota, saying that everything was fine, and that he was going to be alright, taking him back to the main area, where basically everything would go exactly like canon once again. Izumi would end up seeing Todoroki this time instead of Tokiyami, and Bakugo both being taken through the marbles. However, this is where things alter a little bit from the main storyline, as he would be reaching out towards them. Izumi not reaching them, Izuku's chastful spear would end up reaching them, cutting Dabi's fingers clean off. As the marbles would end up falling, Guardian would end up Chastful would turn into a Guardian, snatching up the marbles. As Dabi, seeing this, would go using his fire, however it wouldn't work at all, as the Guardian was almost completely resistant to it, where Dabi would then end up having to retreat along with all of the other villains. Since Izuku now had both Todoroki and Bakugo in his possession, that would mean that the summer training camp wouldn't be ended early, and it would continue to have all of the training. However, once all of the students get back to UA, Momo reveals she placed a tracker on one of the Nomus, and due to the fact that they didn't have the risk of one of the villains killing Bakugo, they could go in just guns blazing and take out all of the villains without being very cautious, as they didn't have a student hostage. So we now end up seeing all of the students living in the dorms, watching on at the TV. Izuku, Izumi, Ida, Bakugo, all of them are all staring at the TV, now instead of helping out All Might with his fight against All for One. So with this, we would end up seeing all of the villains all of the heroes surround the villain base, crashing into it and easily taking care of all of them, as anti-core cuffs would be quickly placed around them due to All Might not worrying about Bakugo. With all of them captured, they would quickly be placed into an cork cop car, which would take them away before All For One could even react. And once he did, he would end up arriving through there, going through his portal, going to attack All Might, before he would be restrained by Endeavor, who would end up being broken away. However, Endeavor would scorch both All For One's arms, which wouldn't quickly heal like he had hoped. This would cause All Might to jump in, punching All For One right across the face, slamming him into the ground. This would weaken All For One so severely that he basically couldn't fight anymore. So weak, he would end up having to forfeit the match and just give up. So, with him forfeiting the match and just now gone out of, or not forfeiting the match, he would end up having to give up, knowing that his only hope now was to escape prison. He wasn't going to be able to beat all of these heroes. There was just hundreds of them surrounding him. There was little to no chance. However, before this could happen, the doctor would end up showing up, saving the day. Nomu scouring throughout, causing all these hundreds of heroes to have to take on a Nomu each by themselves. So we now end up seeing All For One and All Might fight against each other, both of them weakened due to injuries they had sustained years before, as this fight would go similar to canon, both of them trading blow for blow, and All Might giving one last super punch towards All For One. However, because All For One is already so weak, he would end up basically being killed by All Might's attack on accident, and because of the threat All For One posed, there would be no repercussions on the now retiring All Might. And due to this fight, Endeavor taking over #1 hero status, as all of the students would be gathered around the TV, watching, just so intrigued, it just quite shocked how all of them could just be, how all of this could happen so quickly, as All For One dead, Shigaraki and the rest of the League of Villains would basically just kind of be lost, not sure where to go. So with that, we cut forward a couple months, just full of training and this and that, all of stuff that, where we now end up seeing all of the students lined up to get their hero licenses. And all of this training and just having a newfound respect for each other, as all of them would have passed the finals except for some few, and all of them just protecting each other, especially Bakugo and Todoroki having a newfound respect for Izuku, who had saved them. They would end up working together instead of splitting up during the hero licensing, taking down all of this classes or all of the schools that would come at them, and they would fly through the Cork licensing exams, easily taking hold of them, and all of the students would end up passing it with flying colors. Now, with all of the students just having, with now all of these students having their licenses, they would end up as well taking on another challenge. And this challenge would come in the face of their gym class during their second day with their licenses, as now with their licenses they could fully use their quirks. As if anyone got injured with their quirks on campus, it would be UA's responsibility, but now it isn't, so they can go pretty much all out. However, they had to still be monitored. So this is where we see the Class 3A versus Class 1A go up against each other. Well, rather just the big three against Class 1A. Now, this would go pretty much the exact same up until Izuku, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Izumi would all be left standing. Todoroki would use his ice, however, Mirio would end up phasing through it, punching him right in the stomach. Bakugo would launch towards Mirio, hoping to try to protect Todoroki, however, Mirio would dodge an explosion, punching Bakugo right in the stomach. Izumi and Izuku would be left as Izumi would go full cowling, rushing towards him, dodging Mirio's phase through attack before going to punch Mirio himself in the stomach. However, this would be phased through and would be punched in the back. This would leave just Izuku versus Mirio. As the two would stand staring at each other, they would all wonder what was about to happen, as Izuku would end up asking Mirio to go for the first attack. Mirio would rush towards Izuku, however, his punch would be blocked by a guardian standing before him. As this guardian would go to reach down, grabbing Mirio's fist, however, Mirio would phase through it, going to punch Izuku from the back. However, the guardian would reappear there as well, blocking this punch. As Izuku, sensing the guardian was going to be too slow moving, he would turn it back into a pillow, blocking all of Mirio's punches as it would quickly be zooming around, blocking it, tiring out Mirio along with Izuku, who's just dragging it around as fast as he could, trying to block the quick-footed Mirio's attacks. So, as Izuku and Mirio would both get increasingly tired, Izuku would end up jumping back, going in for an attack, using chest full as he would race towards Mirio, going to stab him through the chest. However, Mirio would phase through this, as he would continue to phase through all of Chastaful's attacks. Before Izuku would turn it back into a pillow, as Mirio's punch would end up being blocked once again. Aizawa would end up walking in, before saying that this match was going nowhere. It had been 30 minutes already, and there was no decided victor. And that would decide the match. It would end in a tie. Mirio would look towards Izuku, before putting a fist out, as both of them would bump their fists together, before Mirio would end up saying, "In a month from now, I want a rematch. Got it?" "We'll see who wins then," Izuku would say. "Look, Izuku, I want you to look out for Izumi while she goes on her internship with Night Eye, alright? I feel like she hasn't made as much progress as I'd like her to be. Plus, with the thing Night Eye's chasing after, it's insanely dangerous, alright? Please, I don't want One For All to die, as All For One's already dead. If One For All can continue to be passed down, this world will remain in safety, at least out of the hands of such an evil overlord that was All For One." "Alright," Izuku would say understandably towards his father, as he would end up leaving to go off to internship with Night Eye, which happened to be the same internship that Izumi was going to. Izuku would get there, as he would end up meeting up with Mirio, where we now end up seeing the stamp thing happen, and just all of the things where Night Eye would end up accepting Izumi, as he would automatically accept Izuku, as Izuku wouldn't basically have Night Eye as an uncle, as Night Eye basically being pretty much a sidekick of All Might. He would grow up with Night Eye around a lot, and because of this, Izuku would see Night Eye as basically an uncle. So he would automatically be accepted, as Night Eye knows the power Izuku is capable of. So everything goes like canon up until we end up seeing the three heroes in training walking down the sidewalk. Izuku in front talking with Mirio and Izumi before a small little gray-haired child would bump into him. Izuku would look on towards her, kneeling down, asking if she was okay, when all of a sudden her eyes would widen, shoving Izuku back. I'm okay," she would stutter out, going back into the shadows. As Izuku would stand up, he would end up seeing Overhaul walk out right out of just the alleyway he was in. "I'm sorry about that, hero," he would say in a cold voice. "My daughter here, she doesn't really know how to pay attention. Come on, Eri, let's go," he would say, as Izuku would end up looking at him, staring on towards him, as Overhaul would feel the shift in the tension around in the air. As he would end up stopping, he would turn back to look towards Izuku, however it was too late. As Izuku's Chastaful would already have gone so quickly, cutting off Overhaul's hands. Now that you're corkless, well, you still have your cork, you just can't use it. Now that that's out of the way, I'll be taking Eri from you. I've seen what you've done to her. Night Eye's shown us all. I'm glad I can finally bring you into custody. Mirio would end up appearing right behind him, knocking him out with a single punch to the head. Suku would walk up to Eri before giving her to Izumi, saying that she should take care of her while and Mirio restrained Overhaul. The police would end up coming and taking Overhaul away, as we now end up seeing Suku talking with Night Eye how he managed to save Eri and capture Overhaul. Yeah, I just bumped into him on the sidewalk, saw Eri there too, and decided it was the best course of action to just try to take him down. That's good. Now all we need to do is capture their gang, but I presume without their leader, it will probably fall within the next couple of weeks or so we should probably just wait it out. We cut forward years upon years as Izuku graduates top of his class, becoming the next just top, or becoming one of the members of the next big three, and would even end up fighting Mirio. However, it would end up just finishing in a draw once more, as Izuku and Mirio basically both have opposite type quirks. Izuku has sort of a more physical quirk, however, since Mirio can phase through things, it just seemed useless, and since Izuku has a great blocker, like the Guardian or the Pillow, it also was basically useless, and because of this, every time they would fight, it would end up in a draw. Izuku and Mirio would both end up becoming the number 1 and 2 heroes respectively, as Mirio would never end up losing his quirk. Bakugo and Todoroki would be 4 and 5, as Izuku and Mirio basically weren't really known as the 1 and 2 heroes. They were basically just tied for first, both stopping as in just the same amount of villains every single day, both working harder and harder to try to outbeat or outclass each other, but it would never work, always ending up in a tie. As Izuku end up retiring from a hero with a long and fabled hero career, and many people would see him sort of like an All Might figure, as Izuku would become what his father was, the number 1 hero, and sort of a figure to all, while Izumi would end up basically taking the spot of number 2 after learning how to grasp 100% of One for All. And that is where What If Deku Had King's Powers comes to an end. I hope you all did enjoy it, and if you did, please consider subscribing, as it really does help this channel out, and you can even be notified when the other series that I'm going to be uploading soon are going to come out. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.